politics of the middle class is about more than policy. Really, it needs to be personal. Candidates search for their own storylines that connect them with the average Joe, which for Mitt Romney can be a bit of a struggle. No judgment here. It's just that his personal roots simply were not sown in the salt of the earth. And when he himself became an even richer man, largely through his work at Bain Capital, and that work has dogged the governor all week. It began with a major story out of the Boston Globe questioning what year Mitt Romney actually severed his ties with Bain Capital, and the questions kept coming. Not even the Condi for VP floater could stem the tide. So last night, Governor Romney granted a series of interviews to address this issue.
In February of 1999, I left Bain Capital and left all management authority and responsibility for the firm. I had no ongoing activity or involvement in the affairs of Bain Capital.
So, see, no matter the explanation, the question remains, will Romney's upper crust biography bar his way to connecting with middle-class voters, the Sesame demographic? With me at the table, Marian Wright Edelman, children's rights activist Bob Herbert of Demos, feminist activist Shelby Knox, and Lawrence Otis Graham, lawyer and historian. Okay, I don't think that just because you're rich, it means you cannot connect. But I got to say, the fact that we can't know clearly when he's working, when he's not working, whether or not he's going to release the taxes, is this the bar? Will middle-class voters look at Mitt Romney and say, okay, yes, this guy understands my pain?
That's not happening already. I mean, I think you see it reflected in the polls. They see this guy as kind of a distant figure. He's the epitome of the 1%, actually 1/10 of 1%, maybe. But I think the biggest, and I think that's actually Romney's biggest problem, because the Republicans would have an opening in this economic environment ordinarily. But people remember those Bush years, and they remember what happened to the economy. They don't blame Obama for the state of the economy. They recognize what he inherited. And it's very easy to associate Romney with that era.
Well, especially if he's floating Condi Rice as his VP.
He does nothing to dissociate himself from that, and I think that that's a fundamental mistake.
So let me talk about the taxes piece a little bit, because the big conversation is that President Obama wants to extend the Bush tax cuts. I've been wondering if this is sort of a language and attempt to in fact, push President Obama and George Bush together. But I wanted to correct just like one piece of misinformation. The way that so much media has been reporting this is the idea that President Obama is willing to raise taxes on every household that makes over $250,000, which is not quite right. I just sort of want to say this, right? The first $250,000 of everyone's income is safe, if you will, and it's only the marginal proportion over. So if you make $300,000, it's only on that $50,000 over. Is there a way in which $250,000, when people say that, for what part of the world does that feel like middle class? Living in Louisiana, that feels like rich folks.
I think there is a part of the world where, part of this country where it does feel like middle class, but it's a very small part of the country. And
San Francisco,
we're
New York.
in it.
Yeah, in fact, Sesame Street is in it, right? Right. New York City.
Most Americans do not think that a family making $250,000 a year is middle class. They believe that you've gone beyond the middle class when you get there.
And Melissa, also, when you look at certain communities, cities that formerly had historically been rather successful, places like Memphis. My parents are both from Memphis, Tennessee, where there was a thriving middle class there. My grandfather had a successful trucking company and had restaurants. And you look at those communities now, the black communities, particularly in those cities, are completely decimated. Yes. My wife is from Detroit, same situation there. Mitt Romney is from another Detroit. He's from the Grosse Points, from the exclusive private schools. He talks about identifying with the middle class. But here was a man whose father ran a major auto manufacturing company, and his father was also clearly a presidential candidate who was more forthcoming and better able to connect with the middle class than his own son.
Yeah, and more pro-civil rights, right?
Absolutely.
Sort of openly.
Able to talk about this as opposed to using the NAACP, as Mitt Romney did, as a prop in a narrative that was completely false, and also was a way in which to throw black folks under the bus to galvanize his own audience. And that's what he's done to try to go after the quote-unquote white middle class by throwing black folks under the bus.
This is the Nancy Pelosi claim that the NAACP talk was a prop to get the boos, because getting booed by black folks is good for shoring up a base.
Absolutely. You get those Tea Partiers by getting people it's his Sister Souljah moment. That was what his moment was, to sort of throw this group under the bus, to say, look how strong and tough I am. I'll speak out against black folks who want free stuff, when in fact that's not what the African American community is looking for.
Yeah, well, right. And even the notion that free stuff is actually never free, right? In fact, we pay for it with these taxes. The idea that we are not our government, there's this government that's giving us stuff, we're taxpayers.
Well, we are taxpayers, but I also think it's Mitt Romney who opposed the bailout of GM, which would have destroyed a whole lot of the middle class in Michigan. But more importantly, I think he's endorsed the Paul Ryan budget, which is the most devastatingly irresponsible budget and unjust budget. I mean, they're proposing to not only continue the Bush tax cuts for millionaires and billionaires, over 125 each, but to give them another $265,000 in tax cuts. The top 1% does not need more tax cuts. And I just think this is the most hypocritical effort to talk about being concerned with the budget deficit while you're going to just hand away trillions more.
Yeah, in fact, let's just look at the picture of that, because there is this different, as much as this sort of President Obama wants to extend the Bush tax cuts, I mean, the fact is the difference between what the GOP's plan is and what President Obama's plan is just so clear on this graph that if budgets are moral documents, if our tax policy is an ethical document, these are the ethics, right? This is who the GOP thinks deserves a break in this country today. Up next, we're going to talk a bit about President Obama's special Sherpa to the middle class. What is his middle class story? Where does it come from?